The knock on the door startled me. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to answer it, my heart racing with anticipation. Liam was here. My grandson, the light of my life, was visiting for the summer. I flung the door open, and there he stood, his wide grin mirroring my own. "Grandma," he exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the warmth of the sun. "Liam, sweetheart," I murmured, pulling back to take him in. "Look at you. You've grown even taller since the last time I saw you." He chuckled, stepping inside and setting his bags down. "Only a little, but I brought someone with me. I hope that's okay." Before I could respond, another figure stepped into view. He was tall, with tousled brown hair and a smile that could melt butter. His eyes, a deep hazel, crinkled at the corners as he extended a hand. "Hi, Mrs. Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth and warm.
I'm Ethan.
"Liam's friend. He's been telling me all about you." I shook his hand, feeling a strange shiver run down my spine. "Goodness, he's handsome. Please call me Evelyn." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ethan." Liam clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Ethan's staying with me for a couple of weeks. I hope that's all right." "Of course," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "The more, the merrier. Come in, both of you. I'll get some tea started." As I bustled around the kitchen, I couldn't help but steal glances at Ethan. He was so young, so vibrant. The way he moved, the way he laughed, it was infectious. I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Dinner was a lively affair. We sat around the table, the air filled with the clinking of dishes and the sound of laughter. Liam regaled us with stories of his adventures, and Ethan chimed in with his own tales. I found myself hanging on his every word, captivated by his charm. "So, Evelyn," Ethan said, turning to me with a mischievous glint in his eye. "What's it like, having a grandson as amazing as Liam?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "It's a privilege, let me tell you. He keeps me young." Liam grinned. "Grandma's the best. She's always been there for me." "I can see that," Ethan said, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long. I felt a flush creep up my neck and quickly looked away. After dinner, Ethan insisted on helping with the dishes. I protested, but he was adamant. "You cooked, Evelyn. The least I can do is clean up," he said, rolling up his sleeves and taking the sponge from my hand. I stood beside him, watching as he scrubbed the plates with practiced ease. The proximity was electrifying. What is wrong with me? He's just a boy. But he didn't feel like just a boy. There was something about him, something mature, something worldly. I found myself drawn to his presence, to the way his laughter filled the room. Later that evening, we settled in the living room to watch a movie. Liam sprawled out on the floor, while Ethan and I shared the couch. The film was one of those romantic comedies, the kind that always made me sigh. Halfway through, I glanced at Ethan and found him already looking at me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in decades. Desire. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the movie. "Yes." I breathed, my voice trembling. He leaned in closer, his eyes searching mine. "I just wanted to say, you're really something special." I felt my breath catch. This can't be happening, but it was. And before I could stop myself, I leaned in too. Our lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It was gentle at first, exploratory, but then it deepened, and I felt a fire ignite within me. I hadn't kissed anyone like this in years. His lips were warm, his touch tender. I melted into him, forgetting everything else. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: guilt, longing, exhilaration. I looked at Ethan, searching for some sign of regret, but all I saw was the same desire I felt mirrored in his eyes. "Evelyn," he murmured, his hand brushing against my cheek. "I don't know what this is, but I can't stop thinking about you." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." He smiled softly, his thumb grazing my lower lip. "You don't have to say anything. Just be with me." I glanced over at Liam, who was still engrossed in the movie, blissfully unaware of what had just transpired. What am I doing? But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I couldn't stop. "Not now." "All right," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'll be with you." The room felt charged, the air thick with unspoken words. Ethan's hand lingered on my cheek, his touch warm and insistent. I could feel the heat radiating from him, or maybe it was from me. My skin prickled, my breath shallow. His eyes held mine, and for a moment, the world outside of us ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, the dim glow of the television casting shadows that danced across his face. I shouldn't be doing this. The thought flickered in my mind, but it was drowned out by something louder, something more primal. Ethan's lips were so close, and I could feel the pull, the magnetic force that was drawing me in. My body seemed to move of its own accord, leaning into him, my lips brushing against his in a tentative, almost hesitant kiss. It was soft at first, tentative, as if testing the waters. But then something shifted. The kiss deepened, his hand sliding to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I felt a surge of desire so intense it nearly knocked the breath out of me. I could hear the faint sound of the movie in the background, but it was distant, muffled, like a dream. My fingers found their way into his hair, tugging gently, and I could feel him smile against my lips. "This is wrong," a voice whispered in the back of my mind. But it felt anything but wrong. It felt right. It felt like something I had been missing for years, something I didn't even realize I needed. "Evelyn," he murmured, his voice low and husky, sending a shiver down my spine. "You're incredible." I couldn't help but laugh softly, a nervous chuckle that escaped before I could stop it. "I'm a grandmother, Ethan." "I'm not sure that's the word most people would use." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Then most people are idiots." His thumb traced my lower lip again, and I felt my stomach flip. "You're beautiful, and you deserve to feel wanted." My heart clenched at his words, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. It had been so long since anyone had made me feel this way. So long since I had felt anything other than ordinary. But when I looked into Ethan's eyes, I didn't see ordinary. I saw something raw, something real, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Good," he said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Then we'll figure it out together." He kissed me again, and this time, there was no hesitation. His lips moved against mine with a confidence that left me breathless, his hands roaming over my back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I could feel the heat of his body, the way his heartbeat matched mine, fast and erratic. My fingers gripped his shirt, clinging to him as if he were the only thing keeping me grounded. The sound of Liam shifting on the couch jolted me back to reality, and I pulled away abruptly, my chest rising and falling as I tried to catch my breath. Ethan's eyes were still on me, dark and intense, and I could see the hunger in them. It mirrored my own, and it terrified me. "We can't," I started, but he cut me off with a soft kiss, his lips brushing against mine in a way that made my knees weak. "We can," he said, his voice firm. "We are, and you know you want to." I did. God help me, I did. But the rational part of my brain was screaming at me, warning me of the consequences, of the line we were crossing. Yet, when Ethan's hand found mine, lacing our fingers together, all I could think about was how right it felt, how natural. "Liam," I whispered, glancing over at my grandson, who was still engrossed in the movie. "He won't notice," Ethan said, his voice low. "And even if he does, he's old enough to understand." "Understand what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "That life is too short to deny yourself happiness." He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear. "Let me make you happy, Evelyn." My breath hitched, and I felt a rush of warmth spread through me. This is insane. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I was already too far gone. I nodded, barely perceptible, and Ethan's lips curved into a smile. "Come with me," he said, his voice soft but firm, tugging gently on my hand. I hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Liam, who was still oblivious to the tension in the room. Then, with a deep breath, I followed Ethan, my heart pounding in my chest as he led me toward the hallway. Every step felt like a leap of faith, a step into the unknown. But there was no turning back now. As we slipped into the dimly lit hallway, Ethan turned to me, his hands sliding around my waist, pulling me close. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine. "You have no idea what you do to me." I could feel the heat in his words, the sincerity that made my heart ache. My hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my fingertips. "This is real." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm scared." "Don't be," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I've got you." And then his lips were on mine again, and all thoughts of fear, of consequence, evaporated. There was only him, only us. His hands moved over my body with a confidence that left me breathless, his touch igniting a fire, I hadn't felt in years. My fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against mine. When his shirt fell away, I couldn't help but gasp. His body was lean, toned, and I could feel the heat radiating from him as he pressed against me. My hands roamed over his chest, tracing the lines of his muscles, and I felt a surge of desire so intense it nearly knocked me off my feet. "Evelyn," he murmured, his voice low and husky as he kissed a trail down my neck. "You're driving me crazy." I could feel the truth in his words, the way his body responded to mine, and it only fueled the fire inside me. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as I leaned into him, my body arching against his. Every touch, every kiss, sent waves of pleasure through me, and I felt myself losing control. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I know," he said, cutting me off with a kiss. "I've got you." And then his hands were on my waist, lifting me effortlessly, and I wrapped my legs around him, clinging to him as he carried me down the hall. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps as he pushed open the door to my room and laid me down on the bed. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only us. Only this moment. His hands roamed over my body, his touch leaving trails of fire in their wake, and I felt myself unraveling beneath him. Every kiss, every caress was a revelation, a reminder of what it felt like to be desired, to be wanted. "Evelyn," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine. "You're so beautiful." I could feel the truth in his words, the way his body responded to mine, and it only fueled the fire inside me. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as I leaned into him, my body arching against his. Every touch, every kiss, sent waves of pleasure through me, and I felt myself losing control. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I know," he said, cutting me off with a kiss. "I've got you." And then his hands were on my waist, lifting me effortlessly, and I wrapped my legs around him, clinging to him as he carried me down the hall. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps as he pushed open the door to my room and laid me down on the bed. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only us. Only this moment. His hands roamed over my body, his touch leaving trails of fire in their wake, and I felt myself unraveling beneath him. Every kiss, every caress was a revelation, a reminder of what it felt like to be desired, to be wanted. "Evelyn," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine. "You're so beautiful." The way he said my name, Evelyn, sent a shiver down my spine. His voice was low, almost a growl, and it wrapped around me like silk. I could feel the heat of his body pressed against mine, his chest rising and falling with the same erratic rhythm as my own. His hands were everywhere, tracing every curve, every line, as if memorizing me. I arched into his touch, my fingers tangling in his tousled hair, pulling him closer, needing more. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling, though I wasn't sure if I was asking him to stop or to keep going. He didn't stop. His lips moved from mine, trailing down my neck, his breath hot against my skin. I gasped, my body responding to him in ways I had forgotten it could. His teeth grazed my collarbone, and I let out a soft moan, my hands pressing against his back, urging him on. He chuckled, the sound vibrating against my skin, and I felt a flush of embarrassment at how eager I must seem. But then his hands slid under my blouse, his fingertips brushing against the sensitive skin of my abdomen, and all thoughts of embarrassment vanished. "You're incredible," he murmured, his lips moving back up to capture mine in a searing kiss. His tongue brushed against mine, and I felt a surge of heat low in my belly. My mind was spinning, caught between the reality of what was happening and the disbelief that this young, vibrant man wanted me. His hands moved higher, his thumbs brushing against the underside of my breast, and I whimpered into his mouth. He broke the kiss, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might pull back, might realize how insane this was. But then he smiled, that slow, confident smile that had drawn me in from the start, and his hands moved to the buttons of my blouse. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that sent another wave of heat through me. I nodded, unable to find my voice. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. He took his time, undoing each button with deliberate care, his gaze never leaving mine. When the fabric fell open, he let out a breath, his eyes darkening with desire as he took me in. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but the way he looked at me, like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, made me feel powerful, desired. His hands brushed against the lace of my bra, his fingers tracing the edges, and I shivered. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin where the fabric met flesh, and I gasped, my back arching off the bed. He took his time, exploring every inch of me, his touch both gentle and demanding. His lips moved lower, trailing kisses down my stomach, and my breath hitched as his fingers found the button of my jeans. I tensed, my hands gripping the sheets, torn between wanting him to continue and the nagging voice in the back of my mind that whispered how wrong this was. But then he looked up at me, his hazel eyes dark with need, and I felt myself melt. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he said, his voice rough with desire. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. He held my gaze as he slowly undid the button, then the zipper, his movements deliberate, as if giving me every opportunity to change my mind. When he tugged the fabric down my hips, I lifted them to help him, my heart racing. He slid my jeans off, tossing them aside, and I lay there in nothing but my bra and panties, feeling more exposed than I had in years. But he didn't rush. He took his time, his hands roaming over my legs, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin that made me shiver. His lips followed, kissing a path up my thigh, and I let out a breathy moan, my hands gripping the sheets tighter. When he reached the apex of my thighs, he paused, his breath warm against the thin fabric of my panties. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He looked up at me, his eyes locking with mine, and then he hooked his fingers in the sides of my panties, slowly pulling them down. I lifted my hips again, letting him slide them off, and then I was completely bare before him. I expected him to move, to take what he wanted, but instead, he leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to the inside of my thigh. "You don't have to be nervous," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "I just want to make you feel good." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and then his lips were on me, his tongue exploring, teasing, and I moaned, my back arching off the bed. His hands gripped my hips, holding me in place as he worked, his movements slow and deliberate, driving me to the edge of sanity. I tangled my fingers in his hair, pulling him closer, needing more, needing all of him. "Ethan," I gasped, my body trembling as the pressure built, my hips moving against him of their own accord. He groaned, the vibration sending a jolt of pleasure through me, and then I was falling, shattering, my body convulsing as wave after wave of pleasure crashed over me. He didn't stop until I was spent, my body limp and trembling, my breathing ragged. He kissed his way back at my body, his lips brushing against my stomach, my ribs, the swell of my breast. When he reached my mouth, he kissed me deeply, his tongue sliding against mine, and I could taste myself on him, a heady, intoxicating flavor that sent a fresh wave of desire through me. "You're amazing," he murmured against my lips, his hands roaming over my body, reigniting the fire he had just quenched. I reached for him, my hands fumbling with the button of his jeans, needing to feel him, to give him the same pleasure he had given me. He helped me, shucking his jeans and boxers in one smooth motion, and then he was there, hovering over me, his body hot and hard against mine. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice a rough whisper, and I nodded, pulling him closer, needing him inside me. He slid into me slowly, his movements careful, giving me time to adjust. I wrapped my legs around his waist, urging him deeper, and he groaned, his forehead resting against mine as he began to move. His rhythm was slow at first, almost torturous, but then he picked up speed, his hips snapping against mine in a way that had me gasping for air. We moved together, our bodies in perfect sync, the world outside ceasing to exist. There was only us, only this moment, only the overwhelming sensations that threatened to consume me. His hands gripped my hips, lifting me to meet him with every thrust, and I clung to him, my nails digging into his back as the pleasure built. "Evelyn," he growled, his voice breaking as he neared the edge, and I felt myself shatter again, my body convulsing around him. He let out a low moan, his body stiffening as he found his own release, his hips stuttering against mine. We lay there, our bodies tangled, our breathing ragged, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. But as I looked into his hazel eyes, all I could think was how right it felt, how alive I felt in his arms. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to want more.